My name is Baptiste Marchais. I was born and raised in France. For several years, I was a content creator, what is now called a YouTuber, with a large audience. I was also, in my own way, one of the voices of rural conservatism in France. I fought battles of ideas on the internet, on television, and in the media. Then, gradually, the climate hardened, the pressure intensified, until the moment when I had to make a choice, remain silent or live. I chose to live. I settled here in the United States, in Texas, a land of welcome, a land of freedom. There, I funded an agency specialized in hunting and fishing trips for French-speaking clients coming from Europe. And today, if I stand before you, it is not to talk about hunting. It is to talk about a much deeper subject. I want to talk to you about socialism. Because I come from a country that is one of its most advanced embodiments. And I want to show you concretely how certain ideas, which at first seems reasonable, fair, even moral, can gradually lead a society toward dependence, then toward the loss of freedom, all the way to dictatorship. So how does it work? How is socialism a tool of tyranny? Let's take a simple example. Let's imagine you earn $4,000 per month. You live correctly, you are independent, you provide for your needs. Now, imagine that the states take $2,000 from you in taxes. You have $2,000 left. That is no longer enough to live properly. So the state tells you, don't worry, we're going to help you. And it gives you back $2,000 in aid. At the end of the month, you still have $4,000. On paper, nothing has changed. But in reality, everything has changed. Before, you earned $4,000 by yourself. You were free, independent. Now, you only earn $2,000. And for the other $2,000, you depend on the state. And that dependence has a cost. To receive this aid, you must comply with conditions, criteria, rules. And one day, you realize that you can no longer do without it. This mechanism does not only concern individuals, it also concerns business, the media, farmers, an entire society. This is how socialism creates generalized dependence. I will not dwell on the economic impact, even though it is considerable. Because in this example, taking $2,000 to redistribute $2,000 is not neutral. You have to finance administrations, systems, intermediaries. This process costs money. So for $4,000 to reach your pocket, far more had to be produced. And this additional money comes from a single source, public money. That is to say, everyone's money and ultimately no one's money. But the most important point of my speech is not economic. It is political. It is about control. Let's take another example, private property. In France, being a property owner does not mean being free to enjoy your property. The state exercised extremely strict control over what you can do in your own home. You want to build a house? You need authorization, obviously. You want to add a garden shed? Authorization as well. A swimming pool? Authorization. A veranda? Authorization. Everything is subject to state approval. And of course, each rule is justified. They will tell you, it is for your safety, it is to avoid abuses, it is to protect others. Imagine that your neighbor built a pool on unstable ground and your house collapses. And these arguments make sense. That is precisely where they are effective. Because no one's opposed safety, no one opposes common sense, but each time you accept one of these rules, you open the door a little more. And one day, you find yourself asking permission to live on your own land. Let's take another case. You are the owner of land. It belongs to your family for generations, sometimes almost a millennium for certain families in a country as old as France. You discover a resource in your soil, a treasure, or even oil, to speak about something that concerns us here in Texas. In France, it does not belong to you. Everything under the ground belongs to the state. Once again, the justification seems noble. To protect national heritage, imagine that someone finds Roman remains in their land, they must not be able to sell them to just anyone. But in reality, it means one simple thing. You are not fully the owner of what is yours. For farmers, it is the same. In France, they are among the most regulated in the world. I will give you a very concrete image. A farmer is on his tractor. He sees wild boars destroying his field. He does not have the right to shot. He does not even have the right to have a weapon with him. To act, he must wait for a specific season, authorize hunters with licenses under conditions defined by the states. Meanwhile, his crops are destroyed. Why these rules? For safety, of course. Once again, a justification that seems reasonable, but which in practice removes from this man control over his own work. And that's not all. French farmers today are among the most struggling professions. Charges, taxes, regulation. Many cannot even pay themselves a salary. Those who fed the population struggle to feed themselves. Nearly one farmer per day commits suicide in France every year. That is 30% more than any other profession. So they become dependent on subsidies, on aid, on the state. And this dependence reduces them to silence. Because if the aid stops, everything collapses. That is also why revolts remain limited. Because when your survival depends on the system, you can no longer oppose it. Let us now take another fundamental domain, the media. Everything always starts the same way, with an intention that seems noble. You are told that it is necessary to create a public information service. Why? To guarantee neutrality, to protect citizens from the influence of great fortunes, multinational corporations, private interest. And say it like this, it seems perfectly legitimate. Who will want their information dictated by billionaires? Who will want to be manipulated by economic interest? So we accept. But what they do not tell you is that you are not living a system of influence. You are simply changing masters. Instead of being influenced by private interest, you become dependent on the state itself, and in practice, it is often much worse. Let's take the concrete example of France. In France, the state controls television and radio broadcasting channels. What does that mean, concretely? Yes, private channel exists. Yes, in theory, you can create your own media. But to be broadcast at the national level, you need authorization from the state. And that authorization can be withdrawn. In other words, you can speak freely as long as what you say does not disturb. Otherwise, your channel disappears. That is exactly what recently happened with Channel C8, a channel that had offered open formats, debates, guests with varied opinion, a channel that had invited me twice to debates, by the way. It only took a few years for its broadcasting authorization to be removed. Of course, the official justifications are always the same. Fighting discrimination, protecting values, ensuring respect. Reasons that, once again, seems legitimate. But behind this justification, the result is simple. The state decides who has the right to speak. It is here that we must understand an essential notion. France is not a dictatorship in the classical sense. It is what I call a soft dictatorship. To explain it, imagine a company. In a classic dictatorship, if you criticize the boss, you're fired immediately. In a soft dictatorship, you have the right to criticize officially. But if you do, you are harassed, you are isolated, you are discredited until you leave on your own. The result is the same, but the method is more subtle. And this mechanism relies largely on control of the media. When the state has a direct or indirect influence over the media, it can steer public discourse, not always through direct censorship, but through pressure, through funding, through authorizations. Let's take the written press. Today in France, the economic model of newspaper is in great difficulty. Sales are dropping, readers are disappearing. So the state intervenes. It massively subsidizes the press. Once again, the intention seems commendable, to preserve plurality of information. But these subsidies have a direct consequence. They create dependence, and a dependent press is no longer free. I speak here with full knowledge of the fact. When you become a dissident voice, you very quickly discover the real functioning of the system. Repeated article, accusation without proof, extreme labels, caricature, and above all, no consequences for those who publish them. Why? Because the entire system protects itself. If you type my name on Google, you will find dozens of false articles calling me a Nazi, a supremacist, attributing to me affiliations to group, etc. They even went as far as claiming that Baptiste Marchais was a fake name. And I have never managed to have any of these newspapers condemned for these lies, which nevertheless cost me very dearly on the social level. Because one essential point must not be forgotten. In this type of model, institutions are not independent from one another. Judges in France come from the state itself. They are not elected by the people. They are appointed by the state. Officially, you can contest. Officially, you can sue. But in practice, you are facing a system that judges itself. And a system that judges itself never truly condemns itself. Add to this another element, the impossibility of becoming truly independent. Because one might think, very well, let's leave the system, let's become autonomous, produce your own food, raise your livestock, hunt, fish. But even that is regulated. Regulation, standards, authorization, controls. In some cases, not complying can expose you to criminal penalties. You cannot simply decide to live freely. Even areas as fundamental as education or birth are heavily regulated. Giving birth at home is forbidden, homeschooling as well. Private institutions must comply with programs imposed by the state. Regular inspection can lead to closures. Once again, always for reasons presented as legitimate. Equality, protection, supervision, fight against discrimination, or religious fanaticism. But the results remain the same: control. And all of this is not happening in a distant, unstable, or openly crisis-ridden country. This is happening in France, a country that was one of the cradles of modern democracy, a great historical power, a country where just a few decades ago, life was good. Today, the situation is very different. The tax burden exceeds 60% of national wealth. Public spending is exploding. Purchasing power is collapsing. An average French person earns about $2,000 per month in a country where the cost of living is extremely high. Fuel, energy, food, everything is more expensive. Why? Because of each sector is weighted down by taxes, by regulation, by administrative constraints. And when a system becomes too heavy, it ends up suffocating those it is supposed to protect. What I want to show you through these examples is simple. A system does not become authoritarian overnight. It evolves gradually, through small decisions, through small rules, through small exceptions, always justified, always reasonable in appearance. But when put together, they end up locking the entire society. The media can no longer truly oppose, citizens can no longer be independent, and institutions protect one another. So what about elections? You might ask me, because that is where everything is decided. In theory, a democracy rests on a simple principle. The people choose their leaders. But that choice still has to be real. In France, before you can even run for an election, you must go through a series of administrative obstacles. Rules, validations, conditions, and these conditions already allow upstream to filter candidates. But that is only the beginning, because to campaign, you need money. And to have money, you need access to credit. And who control credit? Banks. And in a system closely tied to the states, banks are not neutral. I know it because I experienced it. Like many dissident voices, I saw my bank accounts closed overnight without real justification, without effective recourse. I could no longer have credit. Therefore, no more access to property. And without a bank account, impossible to run my business. I found myself with nothing. Because when you oppose the system, you are not fucked head on. You are suffocated financially. And under these conditions, how do you want to finance an electoral campaign? How do you want to exist politically? The answer is simple: you cannot. So what remains? A choice between candidates who all belong to the same system. But the control does not stop there. It is also exercised over the voters themselves. How do you influence a vote? By creating dependence. In France, more than 10% of the population works for the state. Millions of people, millions of lives directly linked to public finance. And when your salary depends on the state, you have every interest in that system continuing. Add to that high unemployment, and faced with that, unemployment benefits, once again presented as help, but which created dependence. Because if the system changes, their benefits can disappear, and naturally, the beneficiaries vote for its continuation. Add even more mechanisms: benefits, subsidized housing, social aid, public retirement, and you gradually create millions of captive voters. Voters who no longer vote by conviction, but by necessity. Let us now look at another fundamental subject: self-defense. Here in Texas, it is a deeply rooted right, but in France, it is completely different reality. Carrying a weapon is strictly forbidden for citizens, and this subject is no longer even debated. Even political currents from the far left to the so-called far right no longer dare to question it. Imagine a simple situation. It is 3 a.m., you are sleeping at home with your family, someone forces your door, enters your home. If you use a weapon to defend yourself, you risk prison. The official answer is always the same: call the police. But behind this logic, there is a deeper reality. The states want to be the sole holder of force, the sole guarantor of your safety. Because the day you realize that you can defend yourself, you also realize that you no longer need it. Even for hunters, even for citizens authorized to own a weapon, everything is locked down. Imposed storage, ammunition stored separately, strictly limited use. Your weapon is not there to protect you. It is tolerated, as long as it remains harmless to the system. And in the street, self-defense exists, in theory, but it is subject to a key condition: proportionality. And that is where everything becomes impossible. If someone hits you, you must respond identically. If someone attacks you with a bladed weapon, the use of a firearm will be judged excessive. In practice, you must endure, without ever truly being able to defend yourself. You are starting to see the pattern: control of candidates, control of financing, control of media, control of citizens, control of security. A complete system, coherent, locked. And all of this did not happen in one day. It was built gradually, through small concessions, through small decisions. And this is how we slowly slide toward a system where freedom disappears. I'm not talking to you about a distant country. I'm talking about the country where I was born, a country where my family lived for centuries, a country I saw change, transform, then disappear. I lost that country. Its culture weakened, its people were made dependent, its freedom faded. And I had to leave. But I found another land, the land of the free because of the braves, the United States of America. And here in Texas, I discovered something precious: the true spirit of freedom, the true meaning of the world responsibility, the true American dream. A land of opportunities, a land of courage, a land built by free men, all united by one simple idea: to live free under God. And that freedom, it is not guaranteed. It is never guaranteed. It must be defended every day in every generation. Because I tell you all sincerely, I love this country. I love its freedom. I love its energy. I love the spirit that pushes everyone to stand tall. But precisely because of that, I beg you, never let what you have here become what I fled. Freedom has a price. That price is not comfort. It's not ease, it is struggle. A permanent struggle for your rights, for your values, for your flag, for the Christ. Never let your guard down, because the day you stop defending freedom,
someone else begins to take it. And today, this country is mine too, and I do not want to lose it.